So I have IBS, and I've had IBS for about 10 years now. About 10 years ago, the doctor diagnosed me with it, and ever since then, IBS has been part of my life. It's not what makes me, but it's part of my life. And I thought what would be interesting today is to talk about IBS in terms of how it was for me 10 years ago, what my symptoms and triggers and all that were 10 years ago, and what it's like for me 10 years on, like right here, right now. So that is what I'm going to do today. I guess one of the first things that I noticed 10 years ago was that when I ate certain foods, I didn't feel well, and that's sort of what the doctor then said as well. So food intolerances 10 years ago, for me, it really was only one food intolerance, not plural, it was just gluten. That was the only thing that I really felt and found that when I ate, I really struggled with, so I removed it from my diet. But then over the years after that, gradually more and more things have become an issue for me. So it isn't just gluten. Like now, here in the future, not in here in the future, here in the present, we're talking onion, garlic, like loads of things. Those are the two main things, but still gluten. And then there's also things that I found that along the way I couldn't eat, and now I've been able to reintroduce and I'm pretty fine with. So the likes of, I can have a little bit of caffeine now. I couldn't have any caffeine at one point. Same with alcohol. I don't really drink that much at all anymore, but I can have some. At one point I couldn't. Same goes for things like freaking salad leaves. Like I couldn't have salad, I couldn't have rocket or anything at one point, and now I can. So I've been able to reintroduce certain things to my diet, but there are other things that I haven't, and there's some things that have actually come about more recently that I really struggle with a lot more than I did, say, a few years ago. And 10 years ago, I was absolutely fine with. So something like sugar, just sugar in general. I really struggle with sugar. I don't know if any of you guys are similar to me with this, but it's really difficult because sugar is in everything, even savoury things sugar's in, and I obviously just have to tolerate a small amount of it because otherwise I'd probably not be able to eat hardly anything. But yeah, I've found that generally over the years it's been really difficult in that at first gluten just seemed like awful and the worst thing in the world, but the fact that it's now increased to be this massive long list of things is just even more frustrating. And although, you know, I'm able to reintroduce some things sometimes successfully, more often than not it hasn't been an easy ride, and there's a lot more things that I can't eat than I can, it feels like, which is really frustrating. Okay, so symptoms wise, 10 years ago, I think the first things that made me realise, maybe go to the doctors, were horrendous stomach cramps and pains, like to the point where I just couldn't do a lot. Like I would eat food and then I'd have to lie down immediately, which isn't ideal, especially when you go out, it just ruins your social life and everything. As well as that, flatulence was really bad, so like wind, I just had a lot of it and it wasn't the most pleasant smelling, all of that jazz. And when I was in a new environment like at university, I didn't really want to have that. It was just really uncomfortable and awful, painful and just embarrassing. Another one of those first symptoms that really, you know, was the bloating, and I'm sure a lot of us who struggle with IBS deal with the bloating every single day. It's a nightmare and it was really difficult at the time. It's just one of those things where suddenly clothes that you once wore don't fit, or if they do still fit, they look awful. They're so tight and they're uncomfortable and painful. And yeah, bloating's nasty. And then the other thing that was one of those initial first symptoms for me, so it was the pain, the bloating, the flatulence, and the horrendous constipation, like such bad constipation to the point where it could be like 6-7 days where I didn't go to the toilet. And that was really bad because then that makes the pain worse, it makes the bloating worse, and also it's probably one of the worst things just for your mental health and your brain and how you're feeling when you just can't go to the loo. It just makes you feel really rubbish. So those were the sort of, I think that was four things that really stand out to me as being those things that were at the very beginning symptoms wise of my IBS. And all of those, to be honest, have, you know, kept going all the way through till today. The one thing that I'd say has improved is that I am not constantly constipated over the last few years. That's improved, but it's not improved to the point where I feel like my toilet habit's fine. Sometimes I still don't go to the toilet for quite a few days. Other times I go very frequently, multiple times a day, more than you should probably. So it's sort of gone a bit the other way, and that's not great. So basically toilet habits still bad, and all the other things I mentioned earlier still bad. But as well as that, I feel like my symptoms actually, when you'd imagine and you'd hope that your symptoms over 10 years with something like this would improve, I feel like mine have like increased. So nowadays, not only have I got those sort of classic what I think of and what you probably think of as IBS symptoms, but there are things like fatigue, like joint to muscle aches, like really bad pain in all my muscles, especially in my knees and stuff. Like there's a lot of pain I have like that, and the fatigue is just, oh my God. Like I just sometimes feel like I can't do anything, I can't function. And it's not just like that I feel a bit tired, it's that my whole brain feels like there's a foggy cloud in it. It is proper brain fog, and I just can't function. And that's probably, it's really hard, it's depressing, and it's like makes me just really, really down. All of these symptoms make me feel really down. And when you combine them all together, and 10 years on from when someone's told you, yeah, you have IBS, you still have them, and you've increased the amount of symptoms you have, it's just not cool. It just doesn't make me feel good, if I'm honest. It makes me feel sad. As I mentioned earlier, 10 years ago, right at the beginning, food was one of my main triggers. Not food in general, but certain foods that I couldn't eat. That was a massive trigger for my IBS just flaring up and just not being very nice. As well as that, I would say stress was a huge trigger right from the outset. I started getting all these sort of symptoms and struggling a lot when I just started university, hundreds of miles away from my home, and I was finding it difficult. I wasn't enjoying myself that much, and the stress of everything was just a little bit too much. And whenever I was more stressed, I felt that I just didn't feel quite right, especially in my stomach. So that combination was what I noticed the most of at first. And I think over time, I've just become more aware of like other things. I'm not sure if like these things affected me back then, but they certainly do now and have over the last few years. So even very random things that are completely out of my control, like the weather. The weather really affects my IBS. So when it's really, really hot, I love hot weather, but my body really hates hot weather. It just makes me really flare up. I feel really uncomfortable, and yeah, it's absolutely the worst. As well as that though, I would say hormones, just like my time of the month. I think that is one that I should have always picked up on, but only over the last few years have I really noticed that when it gets to that week before my time of the month, it's horrible. I am not only just a moody, grumpy so-and-so, but I'm also really pained and feeling really rough. So like, it's almost like half the month that happens because it's the week before and the week of, and I just am not quite right, which is frustrating. But yeah, I feel like there's just like a whole host of things these days that seems to affect me. And as I said, they probably always have, but I've just become a lot more aware of them. Especially, well, I say I've become a lot more aware of them, but sometimes I start to have really bad IBS flare-ups in lots of different ways, symptoms-wise, and I can't really work out. And I think it's because it's a combination of lots of these things together. So I think when I've eaten something that maybe hasn't really agreed with me, I get more stressed because of it, because I'm like, oh my God, I can feel something happening. And then the stress combined with the food sort of makes me just go like 10 times, 100 times worse. And yeah, I think it is just, that feels like a trigger now, not knowing what the trigger is, which doesn't make sense, but it kind of does to me. Just, I don't know if any of you have the same sort of thing, but sometimes if you ask me why I feel a certain way in terms of bloating, stomach cramps, all of this, I couldn't really tell you, because I'm like, I've eaten things that I usually can eat. I'm quite calm, the weather outside's not hot, it's not near my time of the month, what on earth can it be? And sometimes I really just don't know. I think me 10 years ago actually thought, you know, when you're diagnosed with something, you kind of think a diagnosis, then you have to go through some stuff, but then there's a cure, right? That's kind of, I mean, not with everything, but that's how I thought it was gonna be. I didn't think it would be that 10 years later, I'm still very much in that same position of definitely still having IBS, and you know, in many ways it actually being worse than it was. But I've just had to come to accept it, because I've come to accept that it's a long-term thing. I've come to accept that it's never going to go away, really. It's just how I control it. Like, there might be some sort of cure one day, but you know, after all this time, I highly doubt it. And I think what's most important is to not sit and feel sorry for yourself, because that's not gonna help. That's probably actually gonna make your whole symptoms and stuff worse. What's more important for me is that I've just come to accept that, you know, it's kind of part of me, and it's more about how I manage the situation and how I go about my daily life, and that I'm aware of things, and that I try my best to live, I guess, just more positively, happy. And obviously you can't always be happy. I really do hate it when people say, oh, you know, just be happy. You know, it's only IBS. It's, you know, it's a mental block sort of thing, and that you can be fine and you can get over it and you can just be as normal, because sometimes you can't. I know that. Sometimes I can't. I'm sure sometimes you can't as well. But it is definitely about just accepting, right, this is something I got, and I'm gonna just try my best to keep going with everything, and it will be all right, and we'll have our good days and we'll have our bad days, but they all balance out, and ultimately that's just IBS. So if you've enjoyed this video, you might actually like to watch my video, which I'll put up here, which is just how IBS feels to me, like more in depth, more gritty. So yeah, that'll be up there. And also up here, I'll just put a link to some what's for dinner videos, which will just give you some recipe ideas for people like me and probably like you. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.